He was really the reason why we started all this. If you read in the program, it's actually true. I just emailed him and thought, what the hell? All he can do is say no. And what did you do? He said yes.
I said yes. Oh, man.
You know him, you love him, you can't live him out of him. The Feringula blog, please welcome P.Z. Myers.
Okay, we're having a great time, right? Yes. Really good meeting. I'm having a wonderful time. I'm learning lots of things. I'm about to talk about something sciencey because Bill said I should. So we'll see what we can do. But before we talk about something sciencey, I want to mention one other thing, is that there is something phenomenal happening with this movement right now. This is the second Imagine No Religion. There's lots of meetings that are sprouting up all over the place. And right now we're in the interesting situation of having two great meetings going on at the same time. So I just wanted to acknowledge on the other side of the continent, right now, well, probably not right now, they're probably partying right now. Women in Secularism is going on, and this is another important part of the movement, I think. It's one of the great changes that's been happening in the last few years, is that we are beginning to appreciate the contributions of people who aren't all old white guys. So let's keep it up. Here we are. The speaker list here is a little short on the ladies. We've got Desiree, we've got Joyce tomorrow, and Miriam. That's great. They're wonderful people. I think part of the reason, though, is that these women were just sucked away to Washington, D.C. And I would like to encourage everyone, if you are organizing another meeting, there's some names. Take a look at those. Those are great people to bring at meetings. You can bring in the occasional token white guy. I'm available most of the time. Otherwise, though, think about broadening your base, and it's a good thing to do. I'll also mention the hashtag there. So, I've been sitting up there with my iPad, paying attention to what people are saying about INR2, but also Women in Secularism, CFI, has been going strong too. So there's lots of cool stuff on the Twitter going on right now. Take a look. Okay, so I'm going to talk about something sciencey, I said. So this is what I've chosen to talk about here. This is my theme: the incompatibility of science and religion. That science and religion are actually at war with each other. We all know this, although certain apologists love to try and deny it, and they're wrong. So this is the talk where I'm going to get kind of arrogant, because that's what I do. And it's okay. Okay, so what I want to argue is, no, you can't bring these together. And the reason is that science is godless. It definitely is. That could change if they trotted out evidence for a God. Well, they'd have to define God, which they haven't even bothered to do that yet. And as Matt has pointed out, you'd have to define what you mean by exists. So there's a few obstacles to that. But in general, when you look at the practice of science, it's godless. What is science? Well, we've got a couple of definitions here. Here's Sean Carroll saying the reason why science and religion are actually incompatible is that in the real world they reach incompatible conclusions. Some religions say the world is 6,000 years old, right? Real science, the stuff based on evidence, as saying that the world is 4.5 billion years. It's amazing that something so basic, so simple and fundamental, so easily explained to people that the world is 4.5 billion years old is something that no Old Testament prophet managed to spit out. And instead, we've got this story in the book of Genesis. They're also incompatible because of their unequivocally opposed epistemologies, the assumptions they make concerning what we can know about the world. Scientists ask questions about how the world works, and religious people tell us this is how the world works, and if it doesn't seem to fit, you have to muddle about with the evidence until it does fit. Jerry Quine says you can't be coherently religious and scientific at the same time, and I agree entirely with this. The way we think scientifically is entirely different from the way we think religiously. And I can concede that there are individuals who are both scientific and religious, but they're not that way at the same time. Otherwise, every time they go to church, they'd be standing up in the middle of the sermon saying, "Oh, what's the evidence for what you just said there?" They don't do that. And in the lab, they would pull out their prayer books, and they'd say a little ditty over their petri dishes. They don't do that either. So they're incompatible ways of looking at the world. And then I got to throw in a quote from you, that what you often find is people trying to find a compromise between religious thinking and scientific thinking. And no, if you do that, it just means you're halfway to crazy town. It doesn't work. So let's not try. Let's admit their fundamental incompatibility. Another reason they're incompatible is religion is wrong. That's kind of simple, right? It's more than that, too. It's that religion is pure nonsense. It's making up stories about the world. And this stuff is affecting the way we look at the world. These are some polling data that show what people think about them. You know, they're asking Protestant pastors here, the people who supposedly are in possession of that sophisticated theology that allows them to understand the world through the lens of the Bible. And look at the kinds of things they say. 74% of Protestant pastors strongly agree that Adam and Eve were literal people, that they actually existed, that the human race was down to 2 individuals some number of years ago. As Andy just explained to you, no, that's not the case. We know, we have the evidence that the smallest population bottleneck was, as he said, between 600 and 2,000 breeding pairs. Not 2. It doesn't work if it's just 2. So that's been falsified, yet they believe it. Among Protestant pastors, 64% strongly believe that God used evolution to create people. As I'll say in a moment, that shows that they didn't understand evolution. Because evolution does not argue that a big invisible man in the sky is changing people. And among Protestant pastors, 30% strongly agree that the earth is about 6,000 years old. We can't even talk to these lunatics, okay? That's just madness to suggest that the earth is 6,000 years old. But, you know, Jesus says it's okay. That's a problem. That here we've got this set of beliefs that are antithetical to the actual facts, the actual evidence at hand, yet people are freely agreeing with them. Why? Because their pastor said so, because their religious teachings say so, because their holy book says so. And it's all nonsense. Now, the thing is, when I bring these things up to people, not you people, you all 100% agree with me, right? We're good. We're fine here. But you bring these up in public where you've got a larger percentage of irrational people, or if you bring it up on the Huffington Post where the crazy people congregate to write to one another, what you find is something very different. They're going to argue with you, and they're going to say, no, that's not true. Science and religion get along perfectly well. They get along just fine and dandy. And they give us a set of arguments for why that's the case. And so what I want to do today is I want to go through 12 different arguments that these people present to us. 12 different arguments for the compatibility of science and religion. And my point will be that each one of them is total bullshit. So what kinds of arguments do they give to defend the idea that religion and science go together? Well, the most common one is this one. Some scientists are Christians, they say. And this is true. I will concede this. I will agree 100%. That's Ken Miller and Francis Collins, and they write books, and they tell things in lectures and so forth. They come right out and say, yes, they're Christian, they're devoutly Christian, they sincerely and honestly believe in their particular religious tradition. So I'm not arguing with that at all. But the thing is that when you read their work, when you read their books, you discover that, yeah, they know their science. They talk good science. Ken Miller's books are some of the best refutations of intelligent design idiocy that you'll find out there. Same with Francis Collins. He's the guy behind the Human Genome Project. And he can talk lucidly and intelligently about administering a big science project. And I commend him for that work. But then what happens? They start talking about religion. And it's insane, okay? Ken Miller's argument is quantum indeterminacy, that God works in mysterious ways by diddling subatomic particles in a way that you can't detect. Okay. I can't detect them. How did Ken Miller? And I could also make a detailed argument about stochastic properties of things, where these things just, you can do analyses of the distribution of mutations, for instance, in genomes. And what you find is that, yeah, it's chance-driven. There's no angels going in and selectively protecting particular genes that people need to survive. All you've got to do is look at the statistics on birth defects to see, no, it doesn't work that way. Francis Collins wrote a book called The Language of God, in which, my jaw dropped open when I read this thing. Here he is, he's a scientist talking about science, and then he talks about how he came to the Christian faith. And what is he's out hiking in the North Cascades, beautiful place, I've been there, and he sees a frozen waterfall frozen in 3 streams. Therefore, the Trinity. And you should be saying immediately, that is a total failure of logic and reason. How can you call yourself a scientist when you make that kind of logical leap? That's what religion has done to their brains. It's turned them into babbling morons. So yeah, I do not buy this argument. Some scientists are Christians, sure. And when they're acting as Christians, they're acting as morons. And the main thing is their science is good, but does it rely on faith and superstition? No. Ken Miller's Catholicism does not contribute to his work in the lab. It does not contribute to his publications. So this is a totally irrelevant argument. Now then, what they'll then turn to is there's another argument they'll bring up. Okay, Ken Miller, Francis Collins are contemporary scientists, but some of the greatest scientists in history have been believers. Look at there, Isaac Newton, Albert Einstein. How can you possibly argue with Isaac Newton? He's a genius, right? He came up with all this. He invented calculus. Most of us have trouble just understanding calculus. He invented it. Well, he and Leibniz. So how can you recognize that religion wasn't important? And he was also a believer. He was a Christian. But when you actually look at what Isaac Newton believed, it turns out to be fairly easy to argue with him because he's got all this nonsense about alchemy. He was really into alchemy. He wanted to transmute base metals into gold without using an accelerator, okay, or anything like that. A lot of his writings, more of his writings were wrapped up in Bible prophecy than anything else. Those have not survived the test of time. When you read about Newton's contributions to humanity, you do not read that he predicted the end of the world, and I think it was 2020. We'll see if it happens, right? But you just don't believe. He was really into the occult, and he's also well known for his battles with Leibniz over the priority on discovering calculus. So there's a lot of crazy stuff in Newton. It's the same as with Ken Miller and Francis Collins, amplified even more, that he made greater contributions to science, but he was also totally bats. What we remember him for is things like gravitation, laws of motion, optics, and calculus. Those aren't religious. There's no God in there. There's no Jesus. Nothing like that in any of his memorable, usable science. And then, of course, Albert Einstein is the modern icon of science. They love to say, oh, he was a true believer. But, you can find quotes from him. I do not believe in a personal God, and I have never denied this, but have expressed it clearly. Apparently not expressed clearly enough for Christians. I think the only way you can express things clearly to a Christian is if you take a baseball bat to their head, and maybe then it will sink in. I am not a Christian. Bam. That would work. So This argument falls apart pretty quickly. Again, we do not remember these guys for their contributions to religion. We remember them for their contributions to an entirely secular science. That's where they made their mark. Okay, so, I'm sitting there battling with these people and saying, okay, no, this is all nonsense. The next thing they'll trot out is this one, that you're promoting, scientism. Scientism is such a dirty word. Scientism is this idea that the only reliable guide to truth is science. And, there's a little grain of truth to that, okay? I really have a lot of respect for science. I think science is the most powerful, most brilliant tool we've ever invented for uncovering the truths about the natural world. But, I would disagree. I would say, okay, if I've got a nice poem that I really like, the proper approach is not to do an analysis of word frequencies or something like that. That's an emotional response, a subjective response. We don't use science for that. But most importantly, what I would say is that religion is no guide to truth at all. All you got to do is look at the Bible and find all the nonsense that they're peddling there and say, okay, this is just, random spewing. This is word salad. This has absolutely no relationship to the real world. So I would say, okay, well, you're right that we should not simply basically reduce everything to numbers and formulae and so forth. But what's your alternative? What do you have to offer? I would like to see these religious people come up and say, well, I've used my religious faith to answer really deep problems that have stumped scientists. I'm really interested in downstream regulation of Hox genes. Okay, what are the Hox genes doing there? I would be impressed if they came up and said, okay, well, I've been looking through the Bhagavad Gita, and it gives me the answer. Here it is, a description of all the downstream pathways in the Hox gene sequence. They can't do that, of course. It's not there. So there's a lot of things that are the domain of science. Religion cannot claim them. Okay, so I've told them, no, I'm not really into this scientism stuff. I'm willing to acknowledge that there's some sorts of holistic things, some sort of subjective phenomena that we can't properly analyze with science, but still, that doesn't help you with your religion, which doesn't help you with anything. Then, of course, there's this number one most common thing they will then confront me with. I have been asked this so many times, told this so many times. Okay, you're not into scientism, but science can't explain love. It's always love. Because apparently God is love, and so, you can't approach science that. Well, as a scientist, what I would then do is I would spout off some formulas for you, all right? This, by the way, is my winning picture. That's my wife up there. And so, yeah, I would, okay, how does my brain work? Well, there's the Goldman equation. Sure, that explains everything. And look, it's got a whole bunch of in and out terms in there. Exactly the way my brain was working at this time. But, not to make light of it, okay, that's not an adequate description of my feelings for my wife. And if you ask my wife, would she tell you something really simple, and that is that love is real. So we've been married for 32 years now, which I think isn't bad. And we have a strong relationship. We love each other. And there aren't any ghosts or magic involved. What it is two human beings. That's all it takes. Nothing spiritual, nothing magical. Love is a real phenomenon. And you're not going to get away with telling me, well, it's inadequate to use science to explain it. I would agree. But you can't explain it with religion either. And there doesn't seem to be any religion involved in our relationship. There doesn't seem to be any spirits or ghosts or gods. So we don't need those to explain human relationships. Humanist principles are more than adequate to do this. Okay, what else can they throw at me? Well, another really common tactic is to back up quite a ways on this. Matt was actually talking about this last night. That have you noticed that when you start getting down and dirty with the religious people and you're battling them and they're Christians and they believe Jesus is God, etc., etc., all of a sudden they're talking about a very abstract sort of deity. And at the extreme, what they'll tell you, oh, God is the sum total of all the laws of the universe, so all scientists are actually worshiping God, and you're actually operating on God's holy rules. E equals mc squared is the holy word of God. Now, they're pantheists, basically. They're saying this. Even if they're Christians, they're saying this kind of stuff. Well, this is kind of silly too, right? This is sort of distancing themselves from any of the claims that religions have made in history. It's just simply saying, okay, this is a common thing, is, oh, there's a bunch of stars out there. The Hubble Space Telescope seems to be used very frequently to testify to the glory of God because, oh man, it's amazing stuff that you see out of this. I'm a biologist, so I prefer cells, but it's the same argument that here's this intricate complexity that we see in biological systems. That is God. Well, my approach then is, okay, well, if that's God, then obviously this is God. And we can specify some rules here. Thou shalt worship no other gods before the mighty Vampiroteuthis. So this is reducing it to absurdity. It's saying that religion is simply everything. Isn't that religionism? If we're getting chewed out for scientism, even when we're not guilty of it, this approach of saying that everything in the universe is permeated with God stuff is pure rank religionism. It's trying to explain everything with religion. Yet religion explains nothing. Does it explain any of those phenomena? Not at all. Saying God did it is not an explanation. Okay, another thing to do. This is an even more common approach. And this is the approach of the Catholic Church, actually. What they say is, okay, God's works are there, but they're cunningly undetectable to science. We're blind to them. You need the Pope to tell you the true answers. And you'll often hear people say this. They'll often say, well, in the case of evolution, for instance, they'll say, the Catholic Church's doctrines are fully compatible with evolutionary theory. Therefore, there's no conflict. And this is a lie. It's not true. What the Catholic Church actually says is that evolution is okay, but you have to incorporate a literal Adam and Eve, which I've already told you is false. We know that there wasn't two individuals who spawned the entire human race. So you have to accept this thing that's been disproven by science. And then also, you have to believe that God came along and in a moment of ensoulment granted human beings souls and made them into beings who would then die and go to heaven, etc., etc. Now, this is not supported by science, right? The thing is that what they've done is they've reduced evolution to a series of phenomena. You say, okay, we're compatible with evolution as long as you just say, okay, one species transformed into another, leading to the human species. But you have to ignore all the science that says, here is the mechanism for this process. Here's how natural selection works. Here's how drift works. Here's how the founder effect works. Here are all these phenomena that we've described quantitatively, that we've measured, that we have assessed in great detail and documented with experimental evidence that they happen. And you have to ignore the chance element behind the science. That's what the Catholic Church does, is let's believe in the phenomena, but let's ignore the mechanisms of science. That's not accepting the science of evolution. And furthermore, just as I would say with Ken Miller, if you're saying it's cunningly undetectable to science, how do you know? What's your evidence for this? They haven't got any except blind assertion from their holy book. Again, that's not science. Science does not just simply open up Charles Darwin's book and say, oh, well, Charles said it, therefore it's true. Okay, next argument I often get is this is an argument for basically surrendering everything. Give up the arguments because religion is a natural part of the human mind, they say. Religion emerges spontaneously in human beings. There's nothing you can do about this. That people will always believe in a God, so just learn to love it. This is a scene from Jesus Camp. Any of you familiar with that, I presume? Yeah, groans. What a horrible story. What this is they take children and they ship them off to this camp for a season of indoctrination, which is very peculiar. If religion is so natural and spontaneously emerges in the human mind, how come you have to send kids off to camp? Now, it seems to me that if that were the case, what you ought to do is we just won't talk to the kids about God. We will leave them alone. We'll just let them flower into a belief in Jesus. And it will happen, right? Because God's talking to them. If you're not yelling at them, the little radio receiver in their brain will receive the signals from God, and they'll hear the natural truth from the creator of the universe. But that's not what they do. The Jesuits have this phrase, give me the child for 7 years, and I will give you the man. This is the way religion works. It isn't spontaneous. It isn't natural. It has to be pounded into people's brains in order for them to accept this. And I agree with the Jesuits there. That's true. If you take a child, you can mold them in all kinds of horrible ways. But I would say that, that's also true for us scientists. Yeah, give me the child for 7 years. You'll see what comes out of that. It's not going to be a believer. Also, I have to argue a little bit with the Jesuit saying, because, she might be a woman. So that's one argument, is it's a natural part of the human mind. I say, no, it's obvious that it's not. If it were, you wouldn't be investing so much effort in training and indoctrination. The other thing that we get a lot is another part of this principle of resigning yourself to the inevitability of religion. They say it's never going to go away. There will never be a time in human history when we are completely free of religion. I would just say, let's look at the data. These are data from the United States. So, we're working from the worst of the worst there. But what it shows is these are the plots of the frequency of religious belief in the population of the United States. And just for any Christians who might happen to be here, there's none, are there? Well, if there were a Christian here, I'd happily point out that top line on religious belief, it's going down. And the line at the bottom is the unbelievers, the ones who do not accept a particular religion. That line is going up. So the trends are going in the right direction. I think it's kind of inevitable that pretty soon, someday, in the next generation or so, those lines are going to meet. And suddenly, the religious people are going to find them in the minority, and then we'll be telling them, well, atheists will never go away, so you might as well learn to accept it. I'll also point out that if you look at other countries besides the benighted United States, this is data from the British Social Attitudes Survey in 2011, 2012. You know that the Richard Dawkins Foundation also sponsored this Ipsos Mori study that was carried out recently that found a very similar sort of thing. And they found that in Britain, about half the population no longer believes in any religion. They reject it outright, say they're not religious. They don't quite come out and say, I'm an atheist, but that's because atheism has some stigma to it, but they've rejected religion. And what you find is about 20% are Church of England, Anglican, in England, which is kind of impressive. We're getting them down there. The funny thing is, too, that when the Ipsos Mori study was done, they carried it a little further, and they asked them, you said that you're Anglican, do you believe in Jesus Christ? And they say, oh, no, not that Jesus stuff. I'm just Anglican. So we're getting there. There are people who are, I think there are majorities of people who are rejecting most of the superstitious part, the supernatural part of religion. And there's still going to be a remnant that say, okay, ritual, I like that. I like going to church. I like getting married in a church. I want to be buried, in a church ceremony. It's all part of the same things that Andy was talking about just a while ago, that there is this ritual component to religion. that probably isn't going away, but you don't need to believe in ghosts in the sky in order to participate in that. Now, another argument you'll get is, okay, it's never going away, they say. I say, look, it is going away. The other argument you'll get is, well, all right, maybe it's fading now, but you needed religion. The human race needed religion in order to succeed. Without religion, we'd still be living in the Stone Age. And I don't quite buy that either. I think that happens to be the solution that our species stumbled upon to forming social groups and so forth, is using religion as a tool for that. But I don't think it was a necessary tool. It's not something I can ever prove because we can't replay the tape of life there. But I'd also argue that, well, if you talk to some of the religious people nowadays, they're still living in the Stone Age. This is a picture from one of Ken Ham's children's books. Yes, Ken Ham writes children's books. And I don't know if you can see it there, but these are pictures of dinosaurs. They love dinosaurs over there. And these are meat-eating dinosaurs. And before the fall, what you see is them using those sharp teeth to eat leaves and fruit. Notice, strangely, down there at the bottom, that's a gorilla. Apparently, before the fall, gorillas had razor-sharp fangs, like a carnivore, but they were using them to gnaw on sticks, which is really weird. I mean, that isn't the dentition of a gorilla. But anyway, they have this total fantasy world they live in. I think of it as Flintstone science. There's Fred and Wilma, and obviously the gorilla has to be Ken Ham. So sure, there's a possibility that religion was a tool used in our ancestry to bring us forward, but right now it's an impediment to advancement. It gets in the way of understanding. So saying that it was so in the past is not an argument for keeping it now. Let's get beyond it and get rid of it. Now, another argument they'll throw at me. Science is evil, right? Death rays and nuclear bombs, eugenics. They really love the sexual revolution in the sense that they hate the sexual revolution. And this is something that science brought upon us. Discovering that birth control pill, suddenly it unshackled women and made them all uppity. It's a terrible thing that science has done to us. And it's true that science has the potential to do all kinds of horrible things. Yes, atom bombs, bad things. They can do horrible things to humanity. But, there's also other stuff. Better sanitation, medicine, education, irrigation, public health, roads, a fresh water system, baths, public order, hygiene, transport, and it goes on and on here. I stole this from Monty Python, you probably recognize it, but expanded it a little bit because the list is really long. There's a lot of things that science has provided for us that we have to respect and admire. And none of those things are provided by religion. So yeah, let's face the fact that science has perils because it's powerful. And science also has advantages. It has strengths because it is powerful. So let's take a cautious approach to using science in a sensible manner. Of course, with religion, you can do nothing other than marshal people like sheep into doing evil things for you, preferably with the fanatics in mind, preferably using some of the tools that science provides you. Okay, another thing they'll do is they'll say, okay, you've just made the argument that religion has the potential to do great evil as well, but they'll say then it's not religion, it's ideologies, it's other ideologies besides religion that can also make people do stupid things. And for some reason, they always focus on communism. Maybe it's because I'm an American and we've come out of this period where communism was the big boogeyman. But yeah, they'll say things like, it's not Christianity, it's ideologies that lead us into doing these horrible, stupid things. And so you can't just blame religion for it. But this doesn't make sense. There's this fallacy, a well-known fallacy called the two-quote fallacy. This does not save you to say that thing does the horrible things that religions do, doesn't rescue religion. Of course, as my Chinese fellow says there, if they rejected fallacies, they wouldn't be theists. Okay, one other argument here. This one, I think Matt will agree, often gets thrown in our faces, and I know he gets a little bit tired of this, the whole objective morality argument, which is so tiresome and so irrelevant here. They say scientists lack an objective morality because if you don't believe in God, you've got nothing to pin your beliefs, your values on, which I say is totally false. I mean, here I am, I'm a scientist, I derive my morality from humanist principles, not science. Science says what is, not what ought to be. So if I'm looking for something to derive my morality from, I do it objectively all right, but it's not by consulting the invisible space ghost. It's by looking at my fellow human beings. Do my actions cause harm to the others I love? Do my actions promote well-being in my community? Do my actions help us advance over problems? Those are good questions to ask. Those are human questions to ask. That's an objective morality as well, is when you value those things that advance and help your community. And of course, then you can also just turn it around and say, okay, well, what about the Bible? You know, the Bible's full of misogyny, witch burnings, crusades, pogroms, pedophile priests, gay hatred. Who are the Christians to talk about morality? I would just say, you know, every time this comes up, just say Catholic Church. We're done. Okay, so let me wrap this up. I know Bill was asking me to speed this up a little bit, and we want a little time for questions, I hope. A few minutes for questions. So let me just summarize by saying, yeah, science is godless. I've heard lots of arguments that you can be a Christian and a scientist and so forth, but I think I've addressed all the big ones. If anyone wants to argue otherwise, give me a better argument, because all the ones they've been giving me so far are terrible arguments. They're stupid arguments. Give me a challenge sometime. And, you know, that's something that you could bring up here. If you've got some argument for this is the wrong crowd. You're probably agreeing with me that science and religion are incompatible. But, you know, as a thought experiment, if you can come up with something interesting, I can add it to this slide presentation and be prepared next time some theist gets clever and tries to bring it up from me. Okay, thank you. I'll stop there and answer questions.